After being introduced in the General Assembly Hall, Colonel Gaddafi shattered the protocol by giving an astonishingly bold speech which lasted more than 90 minutes. He boldly challenged the concept of the veto power held by the permanent members of the Security Council. He declared that veto powers should be annulled and dismissed the representatives as mere orators at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. Gaddafi did not spare the United States, France, Britain, Russia, and China, renaming the Security Council as the Terror Council. In a rather theatrical move, Gaddafi tore up a copy of the United Nations Charter right in front of a startled delegates. He accused the council of being akin to an al-Qaeda-like terrorist body. He even demanded that George Bush and Tony Blair be put on trial for Iraqi war. Colonel Gaddafi demanded for a staggering $7.7 trillion in compensation for the ravages of colonialism on Africa. He pondered whether swine flu was a biological weapon created for the military laboratory. His speech was both audacious and ordinary, encapsulating the essence of the colonel's unique persona. Having read the whole speech, I would say, Gaddafi's UN speech was a whirlwind of provocative statements, grand gestures, and a touch of fatigue-induced crankiness. His 100 minutes or so on the global stage left an indelible mark, whether you agree with him or not. The reaction to Muammar Gaddafi's unconventional and length of speech at the UN General Assembly was indeed a mix of shock, amusement, and bewilderment. For instance, delegates were taken aback by the sheer audacity of Gaddafi's statements. His bold challenges to the existing power structures and his theatrical gestures left many in disbelief. The tearing up of the UN Charter must have been particularly shocking, as it symbolized a direct challenge to the organization's foundational principles. His demand for a colossal sum of money as a compensation for colonialism was met with incredulity. There must have been anger and disapproval by the representatives and the permanent members of the Security Council. These are the very countries he criticized, and they must have been offended by his insults and demands. Also, Gaddafi accused the council of being akin to a terrorist body. For sure, that did not sit well with many. There's not doubting, his speech remains a memorable moment in diplomatic history. Depending on how you see or rate the speech holistically, some people saw the solidification of his reputation as an eccentric and unpredictable leader. Whether he is admired or ridiculed, his words must have left an indelible mark on the global stage. The context of Gaddafi's speech, I think, is this: he emphasized the need for global unity to tackle pressing challenges. This included climate change, capitalist economic decline, food and water crises, terrorism, immigration, piracy, and nuclear proliferation. Gaddafi criticized the founding principles of the United Nations. He pointed out that it was established by a few countries against Germany during the World War II. Gaddafi highlighted the Security Council, with its permanent members and veto powers. He highlighted the fact that these veto powers were shamed without the participation of other nations. He questioned whether all nations were truly equal under such circumstances. His speech was passionate. He covered a wide spectrum of issues, making it a memorable moment in the UN history. Another example Gaddafi used to prove his point is, quote, if a country, Libya for instance, were to exhibit aggression against France, then the entire organization would respond because France is a sovereign state member to the United Nations, and we all share the collective responsibility to protect the sovereignty of nations. However, 65 aggressive wars have taken place without the UN's action to prevent them. 8 other massive, fierce wars, whose victims number 2 million, have been waged by member states that enjoy the veto powers. Those countries would make us believe they seek to maintain the sovereignty and independence of peoples actually use aggressive force against peoples. While we would like to believe that these member states want to work for peace and security of the world and protect peoples, they have instead resorted aggressive wars and hostile behavior. Enjoying the veto they granted themselves as permanent members of the Security Council, they have initiated wars that claimed millions of victims. He went on to say, the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states is enshrined in the Charter of the UN. No country, therefore, has the right to interfere in the affairs of any government, be it democratic or dictatorial, socialist or capitalist, reactionary or progressive. This is the responsibility of each society, it is the internal matter for the people of that country concerned. He went on to say, We joined the United Nations because we thought we were equals, only to find out that one country can object to all the decisions we make. Who gave permanent member states their status in the Security Council? 4 of them granted this status to themselves. The only country that we in the Assembly elected to permanent member status in the Security Council is China. This was done democratically, but the other seats are imposed upon us undemocratically through a dictatorial procedure carried out against our will, and we should not accept it. He goes on and on. Now, with hindsight, people or some nations are actually calling for the United Nations to be revisited. Veto is becoming a stumbling block to progress. The United Nations is practically paralyzed. What do you think? Was Gaddafi telling the truth that some leaders did not want to hear the time? Tells us in the comment section, please. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you all. Catch you in the next one. In 1967, Gaddafi inherited one of the poorest countries Africa. However, by the time he was assassinated, he had transformed Libya into a rich nation. Libya was wealthy under Gaddafi. Under Gaddafi, per capita income in country rose more than the USA $11,000, the 5th highest in Africa. The increase in prosperity was accompanied by a controversial foreign policy and increased domestic political repression. Free education, free medical care, cheap electricity, and it hardly went off except when there was a storm. Fuel was readily available. Libya has oil. There was no lining up to get bakeries because there was enough food and bread or all. Now, all change in Libya, and sadly, it is not looking great.